This is an unofficial fan production and is in no way associated with the BBC. Doctor Who Timeless Tales. Diamonds. Written and read by Ross Wilson. Deep in the vastness of space, beyond the furthest reaches of time, a battered London police box spun through infinity. Inside the unusual ship was its pilot, the mysterious Doctor Who, and his granddaughter, Susan. Fugitives in time, the pair were searching for a place to set down. Unfortunately, despite his attempts to prove otherwise, the Doctor was not as comfortable at the controls of his TARDIS as he would have liked. The ship jittered and jolted back and forth, throwing poor Susan all across the vast control room. Eventually, the ship began to settle, and Susan made her way over to her grandfather's side. "Are we finally landing?" she asked. "Yes, I should think so," the Doctor replied, his hands flitting across the many blinking buttons and switches that were supposed to keep the TARDIS in order. Susan was about to ask where they had found themselves when another sudden jolt rocked the ship. "Grandfather?" she called. "Don't worry, child," he called back. "Just having some trouble with the time tracks, that's all." Time tracks? Susan thought. She understood the mechanics of time travel just as well, in fact, probably better than her grandfather, and she knew that trouble with time tracks was serious. "You mean we can land in space, but not in time?" she asked. The Doctor shot her a look, seeming to forget just how intelligent his travelling companion was. "Yes, well, quite," he muttered. Susan reached forward and flicked a switch, one that she knew would activate the scanner. Sure enough, what looked like a large window appeared on the far wall of the control room. Through the window they could see the vast cityscape that lay outside. "Oh, Grandfather, look, it's wonderful," Susan called. The city itself was made of tall, colourful buildings, each completely unique in its architecture. The most fascinating part was what the buildings appeared to be made of. "Gold," Susan called. "A city made of gold." The Doctor smiled, but before he could make any further comments, the ship juddered once again. "We've slipped another time track," he huffed. In all the confusion, the travellers hardly noticed the change outside. The once golden city was now a vibrant red, and the buildings had changed again, still colourful and unique, but in a completely new arrangement. "Ruby," Susan said. "Because of the time tracks. This is the city at a different point in time, when it was made of ruby." The weary Doctor continued to struggle with his ship, only succeeding in causing more and more judders and more slips in time. Susan watched in awe as the city outside changed and changed, one moment being made of steel, then of emerald, then clouds, then stones, then dreams, each iteration just as stunning as the last. Finally, the Doctor gave the control console a hard thump, and the juddering stopped. The ship seemed to settle. "At last," he sighed. "Infernal machine." "Oh, we must go outside, Grandfather," Susan pleaded. The Doctor pondered for a moment. He almost said no, but the look on his granddaughter's face, along with the simply mesmerising sight he'd seen on the scanner, convinced him otherwise. "Yes, we can go outside, but quickly," he said. "We mustn't stay long. All this trouble with time tracks will no doubt have drawn attention to us, and the last thing we need is attention." "Oh, thank you, Grandfather," Susan cried, giving the old man a hug before throwing the door control and bounding outside. Susan walked around the strange city, staring up at the astounding feats of construction that surrounded her. At the precise point in time at which they had arrived, the city appeared to be made of diamond. Each surface sparkled and shone. Even the citizens, who walked around without taking any notice of the strange box which had materialised from nowhere, had a certain glow about them. The most fascinating part as far as Susan was concerned, was how the city looked so polished and complete, and yet she knew its future and its past when it was completely different, built instead of stone or emerald or any of the other materials she had seen on the TARDIS screen. How could it be possible? A city, a world, that changed so much so often, but never lost its majesty or splendour. She thought it couldn't get any more impressive than its current diamond form, but she also knew that if she returned to visit any of its other iterations, she'd find herself thinking the same. Most interesting, the Doctor mused. Most interesting. Is that all you can say? Susan giggled. I'd say it's far more than that. The old man nodded in silent agreement. The travellers spent some more time exploring, before the Doctor finally decided it was time to go. As she returned to the ship, Susan wondered if she'd ever return to the wonderful city. The Doctor thought the same. He promised himself that when he learned to accurately pilot that delicate TARDIS of his, he would return. And they did. Time after time, the Doctor and the TARDIS returned, sometimes with Susan, sometimes with other friends. Each iteration was new and exciting, utterly different from any other, constantly changing, constantly evolving, and yet each one was just as perfect as the last. Everything was different, yet everything was the same. The most wonderful thing in the universe. The city wasn't half bad either.